I'm Jamey Eisenberg. That's Heath Cummings. That's Robert Turbin, and we got a lot to get to. And there's another trade in the NFL on Wednesday. We got DeAndre Hopkins. The Chiefs were definitely in need of a wide receiver, and they go and call Tennessee. They offer a conditional fourth-round pick, and we get DeAndre Hopkins rescued from the Tennessee Titans, joining the Kansas City Chiefs. They're not going to have JuJu Smith-Schuster in week number 8 in a game for them that they may not even need a wide receiver against the Raiders, but certainly need one long-term because Rashee Rice out for the regular season. Marquise Brown, we don't know when he's going to return at the end of the regular season or in the playoffs. And DeAndre Hopkins, even at his advanced age, will hopefully help and make a difference for not just the Chiefs, but also for fantasy managers. So, gentlemen, we'll start right there. Robert, I'll come to you first. DeAndre Hopkins has not had a great season with the Titans. That has to do, I think, with the quarterback play. That has to do with him coming off a knee injury in the preseason. It also has to do with him being a little bit older. But is he the answer to the Chiefs' woes? Is he going to make Patrick Mahomes a good fantasy quarterback again? Talk about the football fit of just what DeAndre Hopkins can do for this Chiefs offense.
Well, I don't know if he's the answer to the Kansas City Chiefs' woes. I don't really think they need any answers. I think the Chiefs are the Chiefs, and they're going to be in it at the end anyway. But it certainly gives them another option offensively and another guy that you have to pay attention to for opposing defenses. A lot of what DeAndre Hopkins has gone through this season has to do with, like you mentioned, the quarterback play, the offensive scheme. It just wasn't a right fit for him in Tennessee. So then we assume because he's an older wide receiver, he just doesn't have it anymore. Well, that's not the case, okay? We weren't saying that about Davante Adams during his tenure with the Las Vegas Raiders, okay? It was just quarterback play and that offensive system. He'll do much better with the Jets. I feel the same way about DeAndre Hopkins with the Chiefs. He'll be much better and a much better fantasy option as well.
Yeah, I think the one place the Chiefs have really struggled offensively has been in the red zone, and that's the one place that Hopkins can still really help them. He still grades out very well when it comes to route running, still grades out very well when it comes to hands. He's not going to do much for you after the catch, and that's a bit of a problem because that Rashee Rice role, or then we saw JuJu in that role, like that's a lot of catch short and then run stuff. I'm not sure he's going to do much of the running afterwards, but I do think he'll help them in the red zone. And it's worth remembering that as bad as this year has been, just last year, he was responsible for 34% of the Titans' passing yards and 50% of their passing touchdowns in terms of catching them. That's a pretty huge role. I think there's a chance, there's big upside. He's a must roster if somebody dropped him for sure.
All right, so we had two receivers traded last week in Davante Adams and Amari Cooper. Adams did not make an impact in his first game. Cooper did, scoring a touchdown for Buffalo. This week, Heath, if Hopkins plays, are you starting him or are you taking a wait-and-see approach?
I'm probably taking a wait-and-see approach, except, listen, you guys were just talking before the show. Oh, I lost Chris Godwin in that league also. A lot of people lost Mike Evans. People lost Brandon Ayuk. I think there's some people that might need to start DeAndre Hopkins just because you're in a bad spot. It's a terrible defense they're facing. We know we've got a motivated Mahomes after all the weird offseason stuff with the Raiders. Wouldn't be surprised if they get him a touchdown. Don't think it'd be like an Amari Cooper type day if it's a good day. He's probably going to play 15 to 20 snaps.
And then just to circle back, Robert, to Mahomes, who's having a miserable fantasy season. And look, he's still an MVP candidate, but he's got 6 passing touchdowns and 8 interceptions. Is this making Mahomes, this move, making Mahomes back as a number 1 fantasy quarterback for you?
No, it doesn't make him a number 1 fantasy quarterback for me. It does help him slightly. I think he'll perform a little bit better than he has, but to call him number 1 by this move, I disagree with that one.
All right, so we'll see if Mahomes can actually be a better fantasy quarterback than another quarterback who's making his first start in the 2024 campaign, and that's Jameis Winston. We know Deshaun Watson is out for the season with the Achilles injury. They are going to start Winston over Dorian Thompson-Robinson, and we know what Jameis is capable of. He's got a 5,000-yard season on his resume. He's got a 30-touchdown season on his resume. He's got a 30-interception season on his resume. Oh, by the way, that all happened in the same year in Tampa Bay. So, Heath, when you look at Jameis now as a quarterback here for the Browns, is he somebody that you look to start in a 1-quarterback league? And take us through the Browns offense. What do you think this does for David Njoku and the rest of the pass catchers?
He is not someone I'm looking to start in a 1-quarterback league, really only adding him in Superflex or 2 QB leagues. There is big weekly upside, and this week against Baltimore, we know they're kind of a pass funnel defense. It's very tough to run against that defense, at least it was before last week, and it's been easier to pass against them, so maybe he has a good game here. I'm not ranking him like that. I am very excited for David Njoku. We saw the first game without Amari Cooper. It was 14 targets for David Njoku. He's basically been an elite fantasy tight end whenever Deshaun Watson's not been the starting quarterback over the last couple of years. And I do think he's a top 4 tight end this week and probably a top 4 tight end rest of season. Jerry Jeudy and Cedric Tillman, and maybe even Elijah Moore, but definitely Jeudy and Tillman. I want a roster. I want to see their target share in their first full game with Winston, and then we'll decide who we're going to start after that.
Robert, who's the best receiver? Forget about Njoku. Receiver for the Browns moving forward. Tillman just had 8 for 81, first game without Amari Cooper. Jeudy got off to a good start early in the season, but just one catch for 18 yards on 5 targets in this game where DTR and Winston and obviously Deshaun Watson all played in their loss against the Bengals. So who do you like the best moving forward of those pass catchers?
I'm still going to lean on Jerry Jeudy in this situation. I think Jameis Winston is going to end up targeting him a lot more than the other quarterbacks have, but he's the most dependable receiver, in my opinion, out of the receiving corps in Cleveland right now.
And Njoku just had a huge game. Again, 10 catches, 76 yards, and a touchdown on 14 targets. You see, we like him as a top 3 tight end going forward into Week 8 as they take on the Baltimore Ravens. Let's go to Tampa Bay, where we know the bad news that happened Monday against Baltimore. Mike Evans is going to be out until at least Week 12, but more devastating for the Bucs and for fantasy managers. Chris Godwin lost for the season with that ankle injury. So, Robert, where do we go from here? Is it one of these situations where you like one of these other younger receivers to step up? Cade Otton had a big game, 10 targets, 8 catches, 100 yards. Jalen McMillan is a rookie that showed some promise. Trey Palmer a year ago showed some promise. And Sterling Shepard's kind of been a guy that has had some good moments with the Giants, but we know has battled a lot of injuries lately. So what do you think about this receiving core now that they don't have Evans and Godwin?
I think Cade Otton, moves up in the fantasy charts, in my opinion. The other wideouts, though, you're going to probably get some good games from them, but they're not going to have the consistency for me to roster one of these guys on my roster. I know these guys can, play well. Jalen McMillan had a good game the other night, but from a consistency standpoint for the rest of the season, I really wouldn't be leaning on any of these guys. I'd be veering away from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers from a wide receiver aspect, but Cade Otton would be a good roster. And then the running backs are going to be heavily dependent on now in Tampa Bay. And if you don't have any of those guys on your roster, I'd be looking that way as well.
Yeah, I think this probably just saved Rachaad White because we saw kind of the writing on the wall with the more efficient running backs there, but he's now going to have a 15% target share every week, so we can have 2 running backs that you might want to start in Tampa Bay. The one thing I want to watch, and I'm definitely adding Jalen McMillan, but I want to watch who gets the Godwin role, who's playing the slot the most, because all 3 of those guys on the screen, Palmer, Shepard, and McMillan, have spent some time in the slot. McMillan actually has the lowest slot rate of the 3. The guy that gets the Godwin role is the one I'm going to be most interested in on a weekly basis. Hopefully that's McMillan.
And McMillan did play a lot of time, spent a lot of time in the slot in Washington, so that's something to keep an eye on there. But Shepard, based on his history with the Giants, that was a role that he had locked down and was a go-to option for Daniel Jones once upon a time. We're going to talk about the Bucs running backs coming up a little bit later in the show with our running back roundtable. I want to go to San Francisco, where Deebo Samuel was released from the hospital. We know he's dealing with pneumonia, had some fluid in his lungs. You got the bad news in San Francisco also that Brandon Ayuk is out for the season with his ACL and MCL tear. So Heath, take me through the pass catchers here. It's a little bit different because Tampa Bay loses their top 2 guys. We hope Deebo's going to come back at some point. Juwan Jennings did not play in the Week 7 loss against Kansas City with a hip injury. Ricky Pearsall made his debut after the unfortunate situation where he was shot prior to the season. And George Kittle's dealing with a foot injury. So how are we viewing San Francisco's receiving core heading into a big game against Dallas in Week 8?
Yeah, I think the 2 guys that are easy is if George Kittle is playing and healthy, he is the best tight end in fantasy football for me. If Deebo Samuel is healthy and playing, he is a top 12 wide receiver. You don't think about starting him no matter what he's looked like so far this season. Juwan Jennings and Pearsall are the 2 guys that are kind of question marks that I think you probably want to try to add both of those guys, and we'll see what their roles are. What we've seen from Jennings when Ayuk's not on the field over his career is in a much smaller sample size, like that elite production we saw in 1 week this year, 46.5 fantasy points. The per route data looks very similar over his career when there's no Brandon Ayuk. I think Jennings is the one. I put in a 15-20% bid in a couple of leagues where I was really desperate for a wide receiver. He could emerge as a top 25 guy if he can get healthy.
Robert, looking at these 2 receiving cores that we just touched on, Tampa Bay, San Francisco, give me your quick ranking of Jennings, McMillan, Shepard, Pearsall, the non-Deebo Samuel guys of Tampa Bay and San Francisco. Who do you like the best?
Well, if I had to rank just those guys, Jennings would certainly be number 1. Just like he said, anytime Brandon Ayuk's been out and Jennings has been in, he's produced. And Brock Purdy is very comfortable with Juwan Jennings. I'd really be hesitant on rostering Ricky Pearsall. He'd actually come in last out of all 4 of the wide receivers that you named. I'd put McMillan at 2nd, Shepard at 3rd, and then Ricky Pearsall last out of those four, Jawan Jennings being number one.
Yeah, it makes sense. Pearsall's got a lot of room to improve, but we know he is a first-round talent, so hopefully playing in San Francisco will help him. But I agree with you. I think maybe Millen's ceiling's a little bit higher right now, and Shepard just a little bit of safety factor, especially, as Heath said, if he does get that Chris Godwin role.